Hey, thanks for tuning in. In this video I will show you how you can use GitHub to collaborate on your Unreal Engine project. So why should you bother about version control in general? First of all, it allows you to collaborate in a team, so you cannot use a Dropbox or a Google Drive and put your Unreal Engine project there. Then it is used as a backup solution. So if you made a mistake, you can always go back to a previous version. And this allows you also to do experimentation, play around with different things without having the fear of breaking your whole project. So let's give it some context. What version control systems are out there? So the most popular ones are Git, and in the Unreal world it's Perforce. Then you also have solutions like Plastic SCM, which is basically now Unity version control. Then you have also Subversion and Diversion. And we are focusing here on Git. And Git by itself has a huge ecosystem in its own, and GitHub is part of that. So GitHub, GitLab, and Azure DevOps, they are basically hosting providers where your files are located on a server in the cloud. So GitHub is, let's say, the most popular one. It's not really the ideal one, especially when it comes to large files, because it can get a little bit costly. But you can also look at Azure DevOps, which basically fulfills the same purpose at GitHub, but is much more budget friendly when it comes to large projects. Then you have also desktop applications which push and pull files to GitHub, like Git Kraken, Source Tree. There is also GitHub Desktop, and there is Anchorpoint, which will be also mentioned in this video. So why are we picking Git in this case? The arguments that speak for Git are the biggest ecosystem. You have a huge variety of tools, CI/CD setups that work with Git, code editor integrations all work with Git, and it's good enough for large file support. It uses Git LFS as an extension, and this extension came pretty far through the last years. So unless you're building a AAA game which requires multiple terabytes of data, so you can put all your binary files into Git LFS. It's also the most popular version control system in the software development world, and it's also popular in the game development world. And there is no vendor lock-in. So if you, for example, don't like GitHub at some point, you can also move to another solution. Git basically does not lock you in, as it's an open source system with a huge ecosystem. Okay, how does this basically work? So you have a desktop application, in this case you're going to use Anchorpoint, that is pushing your files to GitHub. And then somebody in your team also uses that desktop application to pull the files. And you have a continuous exchange of file versions. The main difference to Dropbox or Google Drive is they basically sync instantly. And on a version control system, you have to explicitly tell that you are pushing the files and that you want to receive, that you want to pull the files. This will not interrupt you during your work because you only get the files when you are ready to do so. All right, let me show you how to do this now on a practical example. So we will push this project to GitHub, and we will also create further versions on that. So for that, open the browser and go to anchorpoint.app/download and download Anchorpoint for Windows or for Mac. Then once you have installed it and you created an account, let me bring it over here, you are at the projects page. And the first thing we're going to do is to connect Anchorpoint with GitHub. So scroll down until you see the integration section and click on Connect Application. Then go to GitHub, click on Connect. Now we're going to open the wizard which will authorize Anchorpoint and GitHub. We click on Start GitHub Login. And this will bring us to GitHub basically. Let me bring this over here. And first of all, you need to have a GitHub account. If you don't have an account, simply click on create an account so that you can log in. Once you have logged in, you are here at the authorization page, and you want to give Anchorpoint access to GitHub so that it can create repositories on there. All right, now, if that's happening here, we are at this page basically, and we would like to test and activate the integration. And first of all, we need to pick an organization. For the sake of this tutorial, I will pick my personal GitHub account, but let's say if you're a studio, it makes sense to create an organization on GitHub and put all your repositories on that organization, and you will be able to choose it from here. But now, for the sake of the tutorial, we use my personal one. And I will click on test and activate, and it will create a test repository that will be also deleted later on. But now the GitHub integration is basically connected. All right, now we can create a Git repository. So for that, go to your projects here and click on New Project. Now we pick Git repository, and we need to browse to the folder of our Unreal project. Okay, we're going to select this folder. And in the remote settings, we're going to pick New GitHub repository. And now this is important, the template for git ignore. So basically, when you have your Unreal Engine project here on this side, can see that we have a lot of, let's say, folders like derived data cache, intermediate, and safe, which are generated locally via the engine. We don't want to upload that content because, first of all, our upload and download times will be definitely longer, and we're going to just consume unnecessary space for files that are generated locally by the engine. Okay, so the gitignore basically is a set of rules that exclude certain file types and certain folders from being uploaded. So definitely have one. Anchorpoint will use a template for Unreal, which you can definitely use in this tutorial. So let's click on continue. Let's leave the name as it is. And at this point, we don't want to invite any team member. We simply would like to create a project. So now it will create the project on GitHub and then also connect the repository to Anchorpoint. All right, the repository has been created. We have the Explorer here with our whole folder structure basically of the project. And the first thing what you're going to do is to push this to GitHub. So we are in the timeline here. We click on changed files and we have all our files here. And then we can add a commit message. And the typical commit message is usually when you do it for the first time, initial commit. And then we press sync. Sync basically is a combination of all these Git operations like git add, git commit, and git push. What Anchorpoint will also do, it will automatically create a git LFS configuration for us. This means that it will scan all the binary files, so all US and UMAP files, and add them automatically as git LFS so that we don't run into the issue that we put binary files into a Git repository without using LFS. The main issues of that is that you can reach your repository limits pretty quickly. So each hosting provider like GitHub, for example, has a certain limit on file sizes and repository sizes, and these limits do not apply directly to Git LFS. So, all right, the project has been pushed to GitHub, and we can check how it looks on the GitHub website. So go for project settings, then go to Git, and then click on visit. And here, basically, we have the whole project on GitHub. And if you're not familiar with GitHub, this might look a bit confusing. So first of all, you can basically ignore all these options here at the top. In the settings, you can invite members, but anything else, you don't need it. What you're going to notice here is that you have the project files located here, and you can browse through this also. And you're going to notice that you don't have the derived data cache, intermediate, and safe folder because they have been ignored by the gitignore. And the gitignore is a text file with all these rules in this case. What you also see is that we got a git attributes file. And that's a rule file which contains rules, which files, in this case UAsset and UMAP, should be pushed as binary files with using the git LFS extension. So this is also done by Anchorpoint. You don't need to do this. But if you would use another Git client, you have to configure this manually. The only view that is also important is that you can click on the commit. And then you can basically see the whole timeline view like you have seen in your Git client. When it comes to branches here we are on the main branch. Usually the recommendation is if you're a small team, then stick with only one branch of the main branch. You're going to use branches, let's say, to organize a project once it gets a bit more complicated. So branches basically are like a mode of your project, like an isolated space that multiple people can work on your project and they don't interfere with that. So branches can branch out and branches have to merge at some point back into the main. But a general recommendation is try to stick with the main branch, and only when it gets a bit more complicated, then you can come up with a branching strategy. All right, let me show you how you can also work with that. So let me go back to my Unreal Engine project. And here, let me go down, make some changes. So I will just do some modifications here. I will save over. Let me move this guy here around, this one as well, and I will save over. So we could also modify blueprints, anything else. We don't need to do any extra configuration in the engine. So when you go to Anchorpoint, let me go to the changed files. You can see basically that you have 3 changed files. Currently we see these actor files. And what you're also going to see is that your face is here. And now we come to a very important part of version control, and this is file locking. So especially on Unreal Engine projects, file locking is essential. And if you, let's say, don't use any integration to Anchorpoint, the automatic way is that once a file gets modified here, it gets also automatically locked. This means that on your team member's computer, this file would be read-only and that this person cannot modify this. And this is basically used to prevent conflicts because Unreal uses binary files in most cases, and you cannot merge these binary files. With text files, it's a bit different. You can work on the same text file at the same time. If you modify different lines of code, like your teammate, then the modifications can be merged and brought into one single file. But with binary files, that's not the case. That's why you use locking in this case. So once you've made your changes, you can say, you can add a meaningful commit message, of course, and then also click on sync. And that will only push the 3 modified files to GitHub. All right, once the files have been pushed to GitHub, the lock is going to be released. This means your team member has to then download the latest version of that file, basically by pulling the files, and then the lock is going to be released and they can continue working on that file. Okay, so on GitHub, let me just show you how this works there. Let me go to our GitHub page, we refresh that, and we also see this commit has been added to GitHub. And once we click on that, we will also see which files have been affected. The reason why you see basically these strange file names is that because these are actor files that are being modified, and Anchorpoint is resolving these actor files and showing you the real actor name in this case, but GitHub cannot do this. Okay, let me go back here, and let me go back to Anchorpoint. So one thing that I would like to show you also is how to work with the Unreal Engine integration, because this is giving you certain advantages. So let me go back to Unreal. And let's say you have installed the Anchorpoint plugin. And if you have done this, the link is in the description below. You can activate it here in the plugin section. So there, search for Anchorpoint. And then you have to activate the plugin basically here. Once you have done this, and of course you have restarted Unreal, you should be able to enable Anchorpoint here in the revision control provider. So if you click on this and click on connect to revision control, we can pick a provider. And this is Anchorpoint in this case. So once you activated the revision control provider, we will continue work here. And there is one big change that you're going to notice. Let's say I move this object around. Now I press save. You're going to see this check out asset dialog. And this is basically allowing you to control the file locking explicitly. So if your change is intentionally, you will click checkout selected. If you just make some experimentations, you can also click on make writable, and then the file is not going to be locked. And this can be helpful. Let's say you want to make some modifications that are just temporarily and you don't want to block your team members. Then you can click on make writable. But in this case, if your change is intentionally, click on check out asset. We can do the same for, let's say, for other assets. We can move this guy around. Let me move this guy also around and then save. And I'm going to check out both of them. So now I have checked them out. I can go to Anchorpoint, and these files are also here there as changed files. And I can also submit them here from the Anchorpoint application, but I can also do this directly from Unreal. So in Unreal, I can go to revision control, submit content, and say move objects again. Let me submit that right now. And now this is going to talk to Anchorpoint and submit all the files directly. Good. Once this is done, we bring over the application. So this commit has been also pushed to GitHub. My team members can also pull this commit. But let's say I made a mistake. Let's say this commit was done by accident and for some reason I want to go back. Remember, version control is giving you a backup system where you can also do experimentations and safely go back. So I can click on that here and I can say undo commit because I would like to revert that changes here. When I click on undo commit, it won't delete the commit from here because that's basically not possible. Once a commit is pushed to GitHub, it's there as a central source of truth. You cannot change that. What you're going to do is you're going to make a reversion. So you basically revert these changes here and you're going to create new changed files, which are basically the revert of the operation of this commit. So we click on undo commit and it will tell us to create changed files. Once I click on this, it created these 3 changed files. And that's basically the old state of these files. Like from previous commits, it's getting back the old states. So now when I go to Unreal, and this is when I have the plugin installed, I don't need to close Unreal because Unreal will simply just reload the level. So let me go back. And it reloaded the level here. So now I can say, okay, I'm fine with this change. Reverted previous commit. And I can push that as well. This is how you basically revert to a previous state of your project. Okay, The last thing I would like to show you is how you add a collaborator on your project. So for that, go to the product settings, go to members and assign a member. And here I can also add a member. I can assign that member to the project. And now Anchorpoint will tell me how I need to do this on GitHub. So I can say, okay, add member on GitHub. And it will bring me to the proper page on GitHub where I can also add a team member here using the GitHub username. All right, I hope this video was helpful for you. Thank you for watching.